The sound of heavy boots echoed through the quiet early morning hallway. Ji-young stood at the entrance of his home, still struggling to believe what he was seeing. There, standing as confidently as ever, was Gai-seng's uncle, his guardian, and now his supposed father for a day, dressed like he had just walked off the set of a gangster movie from the 1980s. A crimson silk shirt, slightly wrinkled and aggressively shiny, clung to his chest like a badge of honor. A pair of black slacks sat tight and high on his waist, cinched with a gold-buckled belt. His neck shimmered with multiple chains that clinked with each movement, and his face, partially covered by dark sunglasses, wore a smile far too smug for a man about to meet a school principal. Ji-young's heart sank. This was going to be a disaster. As they walked toward the school together, Ji-young did everything he could to make his uncle blend in. He asked him to wear a jacket. Guy refused. He suggested they take a longer route to avoid being seen by students. Guy took the main gate instead. The second they entered school grounds, heads turned. Students whispered. Teachers stared. Some backed away instinctively. Ji-young felt like his lungs were caving in from the pressure, but Gai-seng, he thrived in it. He walked like he owned the place, like every stare was a compliment. His very presence unsettled people. He stopped once to admire a vending machine, squinting at it like it was a foreign invention, then chuckled as if the world itself amused him. In the teacher's office, the mood was drastically different. The lead teacher stood with arms crossed, flanked by two other faculty members. They had expected Ji-young's father, a quiet, gentle man, like the student they used to know. Instead, they were met with a man who radiated authority and danger, Mr. Kong. One teacher asked tentatively. Guy smiled, slowly removing his sunglasses. The one and only. The meeting began. At first, it was formal. The teachers voiced their concerns, the change in Ji-young's behavior, his clothing, the rumors of intimidation. They spoke of how he no longer greeted others, how his demeanor scared the other students. They even mentioned complaints from other parents. Guy nodded politely at first, but his tone sharpened as he responded, defending Ji-young as someone under his guidance and protection. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but every word he spoke carried a weight that made the teachers uneasy. Ji-young sat in silence the whole time, torn between fear and fascination. He had always known his family had power, but watching that power bend a room of authority figures without a single curse or raised voice, that changed something in him. He began to understand why people feared them, and maybe, in a small way, why they respected them too. Eventually, the meeting ended abruptly and awkwardly. The teachers, unsure of how to handle the situation further, allowed Ji-young to return to class, but with a warning. Later that day, Ji-young walked through the corridors alone. The image of Gai-seng in the teacher's office played over in his mind. Like a loop, his confidence, his ability to turn a room in his favor was everything Ji-young had tried and failed to mimic. And yet, something inside him still resisted. That resistance was shaken further when he passed by a window and saw Sujin. She was laughing, smiling. Chin was beside her, his arm casually thrown over her shoulder. She didn't push him away. Her face was full of light, the kind of light Ji-young once believed was reserved only for good people. But now she shared it with someone like him. Ji-young looked away, shame and frustration boiling in his stomach. I'm still not enough, he thought. Not bad enough. Not cool enough. Not strong enough. As he turned the next corner, something caught his attention. Down the hallway, a commotion stirred. A group of students stood around, watching something with half-interested expressions. Ji-young moved closer. What he saw shocked him. A smaller student, frail and trembling, stood cornered. But the one doing the bullying wasn't a thug. It was the GI, flanked by two other girls, wearing mischievous smirks. They were teasing the boy, not physically, but with cruel words and mockery that hit just as hard. For a moment, Ji-young stood frozen. Then something shifted. He stepped forward, not to defend the boy, but to act. This was his chance. He thought, his chance to be the kind of bad he'd been trying so hard to imitate. He forced his expression blank, stepped between them, and turned to the boy. "Give me your money," Ji-young said, his voice low and awkward, "or I'll kill you." The words came out stiff and wrong. His body didn't fully commit. His eyes twitched with hesitation, but the boy, already scared, reached into his pocket and handed him some bills. The G watched, stunned. She hadn't expected that. No one had. Ji-young, the former model student, now fully immersed himself in this persona, one that made even her, the usual ice queen, frown. He walked away with the money, trying to wear pride on his face. Inside, he felt sick. Behind him, Gai-seng emerged from the shadows again. He had followed Ji-young after the meeting, unsure if the boy would fall or rise. He saw what happened and smiled to him. This was progress. He didn't care that the act had been shaky, or that Ji-young's eyes still glistened with doubt. All that mattered was intent. Ji-young had taken something from someone weaker, the first step of a true gangster. But not everyone saw it that way. The Ji stared at Ji-young's back as he walked away. There was no admiration in her eyes, only confusion, betrayal, and something colder. The morning air was crisp, but Ji-young's heart was anything but calm. Beside him walked his uncle, Gai-sang, who carried himself with the confidence of someone used to commanding respect, not asking for it. On the way to school, Gai-sang had asked, casually about Ji-young's daily life, what he learned, how he felt walking among normals, and whether any girls had taken an interest in him yet. It was half joking, half sincere, but Ji-young struggled to answer. His thoughts were clouded, not by the questions, but by what lay ahead. As they passed neighborhoods and shop fronts, people's eyes widened, workers bowed subtly, street vendors offered respectful nods. Even the loitering teens straightened up. The moment they caught sight of Gai-sang's unmistakable figure, he was known, feared, respected. Gai-sang didn't bask in the recognition, but he acknowledged every gesture as naturally as breathing. Ji-young tried to walk like him, shoulders broad, posture relaxed, eyes sharp, but his steps betrayed him. He was forcing it, and he knew it. Still, he kept going. At the school gates, whispers erupted like sparks on dry grass. Ji-young had arrived. With a gangster. Students froze mid-step, turning to watch the unlikely duo march in. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others whispered with nervous curiosity. A few even stepped back, instinctively clearing a path. But it wasn't Uncle Gai-sang. They were reacting to it. Was Ji-young transformed? It wasn't his clothes, it was the aura. The weight of someone carrying something darker. Ji-young ignored the stares as best he could, cheeks burning with quiet shame, not because of Gai-sang, but because he was trying so hard to become someone else. He motioned quickly for his uncle to go ahead to the teacher's office and parted ways in the hallway. Inside the school, a quiet storm was brewing in the faculty room. The teachers were already unsettled by Ji-young's recent behavioral shift, but none of them were prepared for the man who now entered the room. Gai-sang's presence stopped every conversation cold. His clothes were loud, his eyes sharp. His very walk said, "I don't follow your rules, I make my own." Whispers passed between teachers like wind through dry leaves. One leaned toward another and muttered cautiously, "Should we call the police?" Another just kept wiping sweat from his brow, clearly regretting ever getting involved, but the head teacher known as Chief straightened his spine and rose. Determined to stay professional, with a decade of experience, he wasn't going to be intimidated, at least not openly. He offered a polite greeting and motioned toward the consultation room, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. To his credit, Chief even brewed tea himself and served it with both hands, careful not to offend. Gai-sang received the cup calmly and sat down, legs slightly apart, back resting comfortably, like a man who had nothing to prove. The conversation began. Chief cleared his throat and explained, "We've asked you here today because Ji-young seems to be going through some difficulties. He's changed, and not for the better." Gai-sang tilted his head slightly. "Difficulties," he repeated, his voice low. His expression darkened, not with anger, but something more serious. The kind of focus that made men hesitate. "Do you mean real trouble?" he asked. Chief quickly clarified, "No, not that kind of trouble. Ji-young wasn't caught fighting or stealing, just acting different, dressing strangely, behaving more rudely, intimidating students without meaning to." Gai-sang nodded silently, as if processing. Then his tone sharpened. "Are there any students here who extort or bully others?" he asked. Chief froze for a moment, flustered. "Of course not," he replied quickly. "Our school maintains strict standards. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior." But Gai-sang's eyes narrowed. He wasn't convinced. As he left the consultation room, something bothered him deeply. He replayed the scene from a few days ago in his mind when he had secretly followed Ji-young and seen him interact with a specific student, one who acted like a predator, one who had that aura, that boy, Shin. Gai-sang paused in the hallway, eyes scanning students as they passed. He wasn't sure yet who Shin was, but he would find him. He wasn't going to let this slide. If his nephew was being dragged into something dark, if the school was lying about its clean image, then Gai-sang would be the one to uncover the truth. He adjusted his jacket, his knuckles cracking slightly. It was no longer just about Ji-young behaving better or worse. It was about protecting him from those who had already made the descent into something far worse. Asterisk. The hallway felt unusually quiet, as though the school itself was holding its breath. Ji-young stood in front of the restroom mirror, staring at his reflection. The boy looking back at him was unrecognizable. Not because of the new way he styled his hair, or the heavy necklace around his neck, or even the fake swagger in his stance, but because of the turmoil hidden behind his eyes. The call from his uncle had left him rattled. The words weren't particularly cruel. In fact, they were spoken with the same casual tone Guy always used. But it was the expectation they carried that disturbed Ji-young. The idea that violence wasn't just permitted now, it was expected of him, demanded even, and worse, it was supposed to make him feel proud. Outside, the school continued its day as usual. Students laughed, argued, rushed to class, scribbled in notebooks. But for Ji-young, time had slowed into a thick, syrupy drag. His thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Sang-gyu. The boy still carried the same timid posture, the same haunted look in his eyes from yesterday. He wasn't a threat, not even close. In another life, Ji-young might have sat next to him during lunch, maybe even helped him with his homework. But here, in this version of himself, Sang-gyu represented a challenge, a test. Ji-young took a step forward. His body moved almost mechanically. In his mind, he tried to summon the voices of his uncle's stuff, commanding, proud. They told him this was the moment where he could truly prove he was one of them. He clenched his fist. It felt unfamiliar in his hand, like a foreign object. Heavy, even though it was empty. A punch, they had told him, would change everything. It would make the teachers stop questioning him. It would make other students fear him. It would solidify his place as the rightful heir of a gangster legacy. But standing in front of Sang-gyu, whose hands trembled as he waited not for pain, but for something he believed would not come, Ji-young felt no pride, no adrenaline, no power, only shame. The boy hadn't even tried to defend himself. He had simply walked forward, believing Ji-young would do the right thing, and that belief burned more than any insult ever could. Ji-young raised his fist higher. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his stomach twisted, the pounding in his chest, the weight of 100 eyes he couldn't see, but could feel his uncles, his classmates, his past self, and his future all watching. He remained like that for a long moment, fist raised, decision frozen. It was then he realized something terrifying. Becoming bad wasn't just about doing terrible things, it was about silencing the part of yourself that knew better. And Ji-young couldn't do that, not yet. Not to this boy, not to himself. Slowly, the fist dropped back to his side. He didn't speak. He didn't explain. He simply turned his back and walked away. Outside the restroom, the school buzzed on. Unbeknownst to him, Guy Sang had already left the school grounds. Disappointed he couldn't teach Shin a lesson, but reassured that Ji-young was making progress after seeing him extort someone the day before. What Guy didn't know, what no one knew, was that Ji-young's conscience wasn't gone. It was buried, struggling, still fighting to breathe beneath the image she was building. Elsewhere, Shin was still planning how to sell the expensive-looking ring he had stolen. He thought he was just making easy money. He didn't know the item carried more than sentimental value. It carried the attention of very dangerous people. And in another part of the school, the Ji sat silently, staring out the window. Her mind drifted back to Ji-young. She couldn't shake the memory of his trembling fist or the guilt in his eyes. She had seen his hesitation. It was brief, but it was enough. Enough to tell her that, deep down, Ji-young was still fighting to remain good in a world that wanted him bad. That afternoon, the household prepared something unexpected. A party, not for honor, not for celebration of an achievement, but for Ji-young's official first steps toward being one of them. Decorations went up, alcohol was poured, music blared. Each of his uncles argued over who would teach him next, how to interrogate, how to manipulate, how to control, but none of them saw the truth, that Ji-young hadn't crossed the line yet. He had simply approached it, stared at it, and recoiled. And as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ji-young sat alone in his room, surrounded by silence, torn between the boy he once was and the man the world now demanded him to become. The restroom was silent, yet the tension in the air felt deafening. Ji-young stood rigid, his hand still gripping Sang-gyu's collar. The boy trembled beneath his grasp, eyes wide with confusion and fear. It was the first time Ji-young had ever seen someone look at him like that, not with admiration, or trust, or even concern, but pure terror. He told himself this was the moment. His debut, as someone feared, someone ruthless. It was what his uncles wanted. It was what his image demanded. But no matter how many times he replayed their advice in his head, no matter how many reasons he gathered to justify the act, his fist refused to move. Sang-gyu, helpless, looked past Ji-young and called for help, his voice weak, cracking. Song Jung-seok was still in the restroom, leaning against the sink with a towel around his neck, just watching. His presence alone kept Ji-young frozen. Ji-young couldn't bring himself to strike someone when someone like Song was watching. It would feel too real, too final. Eventually, Song gave Ji-young a blank, unreadable look, then simply turned and walked out. Ji-young stood there, breathing heavily, sweat trailing down his back. The room suddenly felt colder, the tile beneath his shoes harder, and yet, even now with no one watching, he still couldn't do it. His grip loosened. Sang-gyu stumbled back, unsure whether to thank him or run, so he chose the latter. As he fled the restroom, his words echoed behind him like a curse. "You're not an angel anymore. You're a demon." The words should have made Ji-young proud. He had done what was expected. He had terrified someone. But instead, he stood alone in the restroom, feeling like something inside him had cracked. Not from violence, but from how close he had come to abandoning the last shred of himself. He leaned against the sink, staring into the mirror again. The boy looking back now was worse than unrecognizable. He was unsure of his own reflection. His Uncle Hung's voice echoed in his mind like a warning. "If you choose to become bad, there's no going back. Everything you've built, everything you've protected, will vanish like bubbles in the wind." And then came the image of Soo-jin. The one reason he had tried to be good, but even she had changed. The girl he once admired had chosen someone else, chosen Shin. If she could let go of who Ji-young had been, maybe he could too. Maybe this really was the beginning of something else. When Ji-young returned to class, whispers followed him like shadows. No one believed the rumors, not at first. Ji-young had always been kind, helpful, someone people turned to in silence. That he had threatened someone? It didn't make sense. Even Soo-jin was stunned. Her expression held disbelief, concern, maybe, even a flicker of guilt. Ji-young approached her, his voice calm but distant. He said it plainly, not just, she had changed, but he had too. And perhaps she was beautiful now, more than ever. But beauty didn't erase the gap between who they once were and who they had become. That was when Shin entered the room. His eyes filled with fire the moment he saw Ji-young talking to his girlfriend. The silence shattered as his fist struck Ji-young's face without warning. Ji-young staggered back. Before he could respond, Shin's gang had swarmed him, grabbing his arms, pinning him down. Each punch that followed was heavier, more personal, as if Shin wasn't just defending his pride, but trying to erase Ji-young entirely. Soo-jin tried to intervene, to stop the assault, but Shin's anger was uncontrollable. He turned toward her, with his hand raised, fury replacing all sense of reason, and that's when Ji-young's voice cracked through the chaos, hoarse, desperate, louder than anything he'd ever shouted. "Stop, you bastard." It was enough to wake the sleeping beast out from the corner of the classroom. Song Jung-seok rose from his seat, as if pulled by the sound. His expression was unreadable, yet his steps were deliberate, slow, almost cold. Everyone froze when he approached. He didn't shout, he didn't warn. He simply looked at Shin and said, with terrifying calmness, "If you lay a hand on Soo-jin, you'll die by mine." The room turned to ice. Shin, ever prideful, tried to laugh it off. Even raised his fist again, this time toward Ji-young, but he never got the chance. Before anyone could blink, Song grabbed Shin by the collar and lifted him from the floor like he weighed nothing. Then came the first punch, swift, brutal, like thunder striking flesh. It echoed through the classroom, louder than gasps or screams. Shin dropped to his knees, clutching his jaw in shock. Song's left hand followed, stronger, faster. A second blow that sent Shin sprawling. The classroom turned into chaos as students backed away, unsure whether to run or stay frozen in place. No one dared to stop him because in that moment, they realized something. The most feared student in school wasn't Shin, it was Song. And Ji-young, still aching, bruised and humiliated, looked up from the floor not with gratitude, but with something else, a realization he would never be like Song, not because he wasn't strong enough, but because deep down, he still didn't want to be feared, not like this. Inside the quiet infirmary, time felt slower. The world outside continued, teachers moving from class to class, students laughing in hallways, but for Ji-young, everything was still. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old curtains. The room dimly lit by the overcast sky beyond the window. He sat on the edge of the infirmary bed, shoulders slumped, his body aching not only from Shin's punches, but from something much deeper. Guilt had planted itself firmly in his chest, growing like vines, tightening every time he replayed the moment with Sang-ju in the school bathroom. The look on Sang-ju's face, fear, betrayal, confusion, burned itself into Ji-young's mind. Like a brand, he almost hit him. He had really almost done it. And all for what? Approval, to feel stronger, to prove he was worthy of being a gangster's son. The thought made him want to throw up. Song sat nearby, quietly flipping through a medical textbook left behind on a table. He hadn't said much since bringing Gi-young there. He never did. His silence wasn't cold, it was heavy, as if he carried a weight no one else could see. And perhaps that's why Ji-young finally spoke. Why, did you help me? His voice was small, brittle, like a child who had been caught doing something wrong. Song closed the book and looked out the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, he answered. You looked like someone who needed help. No judgment, no moral lesson, just a simple truth. And that truth shook Ji-young more than any scolding ever could. I almost hit him, Song, Ji-young muttered, his fingers digging into his lap. A kid who's done nothing to me. I almost turned into someone I hate. He thought of his uncle's words. Once you choose this path, there's no turning back. Everything you've built as a good person will vanish like a bubble. He thought of Sujin, the reason he once tried so hard to be kind. But now even she had changed, drawn into someone else's orbit. Maybe she had always belonged there. Maybe he had never stood a chance. That made his chest hurt worse than any punch Shin had landed. Meanwhile, outside the school, Shin sat in a back alley, surrounded by his usual gang. His right eye was swollen shut, his pride wounded far more severely. Every time he blinked, he could still see Song's face. Calm, unshaken, unafraid. That guy, Shin growled, voice thick with rage. He thinks he's untouchable. His friends sat in awkward silence. They had seen how effortlessly Song had floored Shin. They had felt the fear of standing near him. They weren't ready for another confrontation. Even if it's 3-on-1, we'll lose, one of them muttered. But Shin wasn't listening. His thoughts had already drifted to the people he knew outside school, the kind of people who didn't ask questions, who didn't fight fair. He had connections, favors owed. If fists weren't enough to take Song down, maybe something dirtier would do the job, and he was willing to go that far. Elsewhere. In the school cafeteria, the G sat at the edge of her seat, picking nervously at her food while glancing over at Ji-young's usual table, but he wasn't there. The rumors had already started, spreading Ji-young had been beaten up by Shin. Some said he fought back. Others claimed he cried. The G tried to mask her concern, but it showed. One of Ji-young's friends noticed. You're acting weird, he said with a teasing smile. You like him, don't you? The G rolled her eyes, but her cheeks flushed. She tried to deflect, asking casual questions about Ji on what kind of girl he liked, what food he enjoyed, but the more she asked, the more confused she became. His friends gave vague answers, and one even thought she was interested in him instead. Frustrated, she finally blurted, do any of you even know what kind of girl Ji-young likes? They shrugged. He's not the type to talk about that. Still, one of them mentioned his favorite snack, a small thing, but enough for the G to cling to. Maybe it was silly, but buying that snack and giving it to him felt like a way to say what she couldn't put into words. Like maybe, through that tiny gesture, she could start to fix things between them. With the snack in hand, the G headed back toward class when she heard the rumor. Ji-young was in the infirmary, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't think. She just ran. The halls blurred around her. Her shoes echoed against the linoleum. Her heart raced faster than her feet. She didn't stop until she reached the infirmary door. She burst in, panting, eyes wide with panic, and found Ji-young sitting on the bed, bruised, exhausted, and crying. The sight stopped her in her tracks. Ji-young had always seemed strong in his own way. Kind, gentle, never confrontational. Seeing him this broken was like seeing a mirror shatter in slow motion. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know why she'd run there. But her hands, still holding his favorite snack, trembled. Back in the infirmary, the G finally found her voice. She walked over, offering the snack to Ji-young with trembling fingers. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. I heard you were hurt, she said, almost in a whisper. Ji-young looked up, surprised. His eyes still red from crying, but her presence, unexpected, sincere, soothed something inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything yet.